Oddajo je omogočilo Društvo za osvoboditev živali in njihove pravice. Zemlja, čudovit planet, naš dom. Kako skrbimo zanj? Kakšno zapuščino bomo zapustili svojim otrokom? Za sožitje med človekom, naravo, živalmi in zemljo. Za planet, ki bo nudil varen dom tudi generacijam za nami.
I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy days to be here this afternoon. And as we just heard, I'm the author of a book that's just been translated. What I'd like to do briefly here in the time that we have is talk just about the outer ramifications, the outer effects of eating animal foods, and then the inner effects, because the inner effects is what's really interesting. But I think it's helpful to talk a little bit about the outer effects. So briefly, when we talk about animal agriculture, we're talking about probably what is really, is truly the single most devastating thing human beings are doing to the earth today, is animal agriculture, in terms of air pollution, water pollution, the extinction of species, the overfishing of the oceans, cutting down rainforests, genetically engineering crops to feed to factory-farmed animals. It's very inefficient, it's very wasteful. It takes huge amounts of land, which could grow food for people, but instead of growing food for people, we're growing basically corn and soybeans and other grains that are fed to animals. Animals convert what could be very healthy foods into what? Three main things: saturated fat, cholesterol, and acidifying animal protein. And one more, the fourth thing, huge amounts of sewage. One large pig operation, I know you don't have them that big probably here, but in the United States, a large pig operation creates more sewage than the entire New York City. And it's basically not, there aren't any rules really regulating the sewage from animals compared to human sewage, and it's more toxic. So we have the toxic runoff, water pollution, it's called eutrophication, or causing algae blooms, the loss of oxygen, dead zones in the ocean. It takes enormous amounts of fish. For example, we are now overfishing the oceans in completely unsustainable way. Since the late 1980s, every single year, the capacity of the fishing industry worldwide has increased because we have bigger ships, better technology. We can just catch more fish than ever. And yet, every year since the late 1980s, the amount of fish that's been caught has gone down because the fish are gone. They're just not there. We have overfished. There's very few large fish left at all. They've been basically fished to the brink of extinction. The entire ocean ecosystems are devastated. In the United States, it's 2/3. I think here in Europe it's about a half. But of all the fish that we're eating is factory farmed fish, where they have the fish growing in cages, which is very cruel and extremely toxic. And then the demand for fish is so huge because we're not just growing fish for people. Most people don't realize that animals are fed fish. Like cows eat a lot of fish because scientists have discovered fish meal. They grind up the fish, they mix it in with the grain and the other things, so that because scientists realize that cows will give more milk and they'll fatten up faster. So cows, pigs, chickens are eating fish. They're also typically fed to each other. Slaughterhouse waste is ground up and added to the grains. So cows are typically eating pigs and chickens and all that. It's going. This is what they're eating. So to fatten them up, and this is devastating not only to their health and to our health, but to the ecosystems because it causes overfishing. And it also is causing another thing, the devastation of the rainforests. Right now in the Amazonian basin in South America, we're cutting down about 1 acre per second of rainforest. And this is going on every single second. An acre, what is an acre? An acre is, it's a lot, it's big, it's a big area. And so when you're cutting down, say, an area of rainforest, you're not just cutting down some trees. This is actually destroying ecosystems that took millions of years to evolve. And so we're causing the extinction of species. The estimates vary, but typically they're between 40 and 60. Very often biologists say species a day are going extinct, not just of insects, but of plants and so forth. A lot of species are going extinct before they've ever even been, we don't even know what they are. So we have this mass extinction of species, which is reducing the genetic diversity on our planet. It's very important that we have genetic diversity, but we're attacking this. We're attacking the living, breathing systems of the earth. The rainforests are being cut down for one main reason, to graze cattle and to grow soybeans, typically, mostly soybeans, to feed to factory farmed cows and pigs and chickens, and factory farmed fish eat a lot of grain that are then fed to people or fed to salmon, or factory farmed tuna they now have, or fed to pigs and cows and chickens. So this is extremely devastating environmentally, and it's also the driving force behind global climate destabilization, because animal agriculture creates a lot of nitrous oxide and methane, which are much more powerful as greenhouse gases than carbon dioxide, cutting down the rainforest, causing the acidification of oceans. All of this is destroying the climate stability, as well as the web of life on this earth. So human beings, unfortunately, right now are attacking the living ecosystems of our earth in a very aggressive way, and the main thing that's doing it is animal agriculture. And if anyone would like to reduce, it's called the eco footprint, how much suffering we're causing, how much environmental devastation we're causing, the best thing to do is to move toward a plant-based diet, to move toward a organic vegan diet, because it's typically, very conservative estimate is 15-1. In other words, 15 people eating a plant-based diet use as much land and petroleum and water and create as much pollution as one person eating a typical standard diet of meat, dairy products, and eggs. With water, according to the United Nations, it's about 30-1. So it's much, and water is becoming more and more of an issue worldwide. So I won't say more about it. It's a huge subject. I have a whole chapter in the World Peace Diet that goes into this. But just to make that point here in the beginning, that environmentally, the ramifications of eating animal foods are devastating. And so as we move toward a more plant-based diet, we allow the ecosystems to heal. We allow the oceans to come back. We allow the rivers to run clean again. We can feed everyone on a fraction of the land. We can let wildlife habitat come back. Wildlife are being they're losing their habitat, so they're going extinct. And this is something, if we care about not just the animals, the pigs and cows and chickens and fish, but also if we care about the wild animals that are being destroyed by animal agriculture. Then moving toward a plant-based diet is the most loving thing we can do in that case. The other thing, maybe two more things, in the outer world, the other thing is the cultural devastation. So, for example, we're growing enough food right now, and no one argues this, to feed between 12 and 15 billion people. Okay, we're growing a lot of food. How many people are there on the planet now, roughly? Anybody know? About 7, right? About 7 billion, a little over 7 billion now. So we're growing enough food to feed between 12 and 15 billion people, but we have roughly a billion people, a billion of our own brothers and sisters, who are dying of starvation. Every day, 30, 40,000 kids are dying of starvation. So and how could this be possible? How could we be, as human beings, so inefficient, so foolish, that we can grow enough food to feed everybody twice as much as they could possibly eat, and yet we have a billion people starving? And this is really devastating to our society, to our world. It causes war. The reason why is because we're feeding most of the grain to animals. People go hungry, and so the more industrialized, the more developed nations have economies that are powerful enough to drive up the price of grain on the world markets to feed to our pigs and cows and chickens. They don't go hungry, they're eating, we feed them grain, but the price is now too high for people in less developed economies. They can't afford it anymore, and they're going hungry, they're starving. So we're directly causing that by taking out our wallet and paying for meat, dairy products, and eggs. We're causing directly hunger to these other people. And this is one of the driving forces behind war in the world is basically this inequality. When you have some people that are taking so much and using so many resources and just eating meat and dairy and eggs, while other people don't even have enough to feed their little kids some rice or some grain just to survive. That's the driving force behind war and inequality. And also, as part of this mentality, is that it's also essentially a mentality with every meal where we're dominating the feminine principle, the female. Because, first of all, we have to understand that from the very beginning of animal agriculture, which is not very old, it's only about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago that we first started animal agriculture, owning animals as property for food. We call it herding. Herding, it started with in Iraq, apparently according to anthropologists in northeastern Iraq, where people for the first time started owning wild sheep, and then wild goats, and then about 2,000 years later, wild cows. And what they were doing essentially when they started owning them as property, they were reducing them. So this is the mentality I mentioned of reductionism, reducing them from mysterious and powerful and respected beings that share the earth with us to mere property, to just something I own as a thing. So this revolution took a long time. It took thousands of years. Very gradually, over many generations, people started more and more to see nature as something that you own, and to see animals as either as beings that you own as property, or all the other animals that were not owned as property, the sheep and the goats and the cows and so forth, and later pigs and chickens and so forth. Everything else, all the other animals, were potential pests. We had this idea, they could bother us. They could, the wolves and the coyotes and the prairie dogs and the bears and the bobcats and the foxes and lions, whatever. We have to kill them because they might hurt our property, And the very first science was basically men figuring out how they could dominate female animals. Because it was basically the females, yes, the domination of the feminine, it was basically the female animals who were the ones that were the source of wealth. So they started impregnating these females against their will. Today they do it on dairies, they call it a rape rack. They just inseminate them with a sperm gun. And so these animals are starting to be seen merely as breeders. They're just impregnated against their will. And then when the baby is born, the baby cow or the baby goat or the sheep, the mother thinks, that's my baby. And the man says, no, that's my baby, and takes it away, takes him away from the mother, and then they kill the baby. And then they impregnate the mother again, and they kill the fatted calf. So it's this incredible violence against the feminine, against the female. It's dominating her body, stealing her babies, dominating her uterus and her reproductive organs and cycles, stealing her milk. And so we do this horrible violence against female animals routinely. That's the background of our culture. You take the curtain away of this culture, of our culture, Western culture, and you'll see this massive violence towards female animals for meat and milk and eggs. And it not only harms them, it harms us. We have to suppress what I refer to in the World Peace Diet as Sophia. Sophia was the ancient Greek goddess of wisdom. Sophia means wisdom. And this is, I believe, the understanding is that Sophia, this inner feminine wisdom, the goddess of wisdom, lives within all of us, whether we're men or women. We have a natural, healthy compassion for life. A mother, for example, when she gives birth to a baby, she just, not only human beings, all beings, but human beings especially, we just want to love that little baby. A mother will give her life for her baby. It's this wonderful love, this caring, and this love of protection and compassion and kindness and protecting the baby and protecting the earth, all of that. That's Sophia wisdom. By forcing us to eat meat and dairy and by raping and killing these female animals and stealing their babies, that Sophia is suppressed. And when Sophia is suppressed in a society, then the society can do what I've been saying. We can be destroying the ecosystems and allowing corporations to take over everything. So what veganism is essentially it's the resurrection of Sophia. It's Sophia coming back to life and saying, no, you're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to allow violence towards animals and towards the earth and towards us and our children and future generations. We're going to have a world of kindness and compassion and caring, and we're not just going to talk about it, we're going to live it. And taking out our wallets and eating food is the most powerful way. Food is our most intimate connection with nature and with our culture. Yeah, I mean, when you look at this body, we're looking at the effects of food. Right now, you're looking at some broccoli and rice and some figs talking to you. Right? I mean, this is a very powerful thing. Food is enormous. It becomes who we are. So it should be something that we're very aware of. But in fact, in many cases, it's not something. Most people don't want to think about where their food comes from. So it's this domination of the feminine. I think that's, in many ways, one of the most severe things. And so just to finish up that point about the history of this, because I think this is also very interesting, is that when we started, I call it in World Peace Diet the herding revolution. I believe this was the last revolution our species ever had. We started owning animals as property for food. It was a revolution that changed everything. Gradually, we became owners of animals, and the basic harmony between us and nature was broken, and the arising of what's referred to as patriarchy, or men dominating women, arose because men were not only dominating animals and seeing these animals merely as breeders. They would just impregnate them, and the science was to have babies that would give more milk and have more meat and have more fur, more wool, and so forth. They began to look at women gradually as mere objects to breed, and so they'd have better, bigger boys and so forth, better warriors. And so by the time the historic period emerged, which was 3,000 years ago, we have the first writing, basically. We just look at the kind of culture that's there then, and what is it? It's basically a culture where you have a wealthy elite, and they own the capital. The word capita is in the ancient Latin language means head, as in head of sheep and goats and cows. Wealth was livestock. Whoever had the most livestock, whoever had the most cows and sheep and goats, was the wealthiest. And the wealthiest ones, we look back and call them like the kings, they invented two institutions that we still have with us. The first institution they invented, the ancient Sanskrit word gavya, comes from the word go, which means cow. Gavya, it means literally the desire for more cows. And it's translated as war. The first war where you had a whole bunch of people going and attacking. He said it was the first get-rich-quick scheme. Does this sound familiar? When people want to get rich, they make a war. And it does. It always works to make a certain wealthy class much more wealthy. The bankers and so forth, that's what they do. And so, but the ancient kings, they would go to war, and whoever won the war, then they would get all that livestock, all that wealth would become theirs. They would double their wealth overnight if they won the war. And what I have to say is that whatever we've done to animals, we eventually did to people. So right away, when you start owning animals as property, as just things, then they instituted the second institution for the very first time, which was slavery. So the people who lost the war, too bad. You become our property, just like the cows and sheep do. And so men became their slaves, and very often, unfortunately, they would castrate the men like they did the animals, and they would make them work in the fields, and then the women would become their slaves, and they would become concubines, and they would impregnate their females, and to make more slaves, basically, and just to, as more slaves the better. And so we had the arising of a very warlike culture out of the Middle East, out of the Eastern Mediterranean. I think underlying all of our efforts we've been trying so hard for centuries to create a society of peace and freedom and justice and abundance and equality, and we're not getting there, right? But we're eating meat and dairy, and then we haven't questioned that. So that's the thing. That's the spinning fury that's been invisible at the core of our culture. So the idea now is to see that and to make that, and when we make that change, that deep change, then we will see everything else will follow from that. And if we don't make that change, if we think we can still eat meat and dairy and have a world of freedom and peace, our efforts are merely ironic. Every one of us, I think, can find our unique way of plugging into this and helping to bring it forward, and we have lots of wonderful examples of people who are working to do that. You are our heroes and our inspiration. Keep up the great work. Much love to you all. Thanks so much for coming this afternoon. and I look forward to seeing you again. Thanks so much.
Slovensko-vegansko društvo je organizator bilo tega predavanja, če prav razumem, in vi ste tudi izdali to knjigo, ali kako?
Ta knjiga je šla pri založbi Aurora v sodelovanju z našim društvom. Jaz verjamem, da smo vsi povezani v eno, da tako kot je Will rekel, karkoli se nekje zgodi, je v bistvu se tiče vseh nas. V bistvu se ne gre za sporočilo neke posebne skupine ali pa recimo za projekt našega društva ali pa majhne skupinice. In ne govorimo o problemih ali pa idejah ali čemerkoli, ki se tičejo samo mene ali pa tebe oziroma naju dveh ali pa ne vem, nas 5, ampak gre se za stvari, ki se tičejo v bistvu nas vseh. Se pravi, gre se za najpomembnejše stvari, ki so povezane z življenjem, z nadaljevanjem življenja na zemlji, in jaz verjamem, da gremo v dobri smeri in čutim, da se dogajajo v Sloveniji zelo pomembne in pozitivne stvari.
Teja, kako se ti je zdelo predavanje danes?
Mislim, da je bilo to predavanje, ki bi ga mogel marsikdo slišati, sploh če se še ni seznanil z veganstvom.
Vidim, da si tudi knjigo kupila. Jo boš imela za sebe ali jo boš komu?
Definitivno jo bom imela zase.
Si sama že vegetarijanka, veganka?
Veganka sem že skoraj 2 leti.
Koliko si pa stara, če smem vprašati?
Ne smeš.
Zdaj, ko smo vsi še malo pod vtisom tega čudovitega predavanja, najprej sta vidva tudi na tej poti, kako da sta se odločila za priti to poslušati?
Ja, v bistvu midva jeva vegansko že dobre 2 leti, že 3 leta bo kmalu, in sva vesela takih predavanj, ki naju še dodatno spodbujajo na tej poti.
Vem, da sta tudi športna tipa, sploh vi, kako se ujema ta prehrana športom?
Zelo dobro. Marsikdo misli, da seveda ne gre, da če si športnik, sploh če tečeš naprimer maratone ali pa še kaj več, da to pa ne gre, ampak v resnici zelo dobro gre. V bistvu moje počutje, odkar sem spremenil prehrano, je kvečemu šlo na boljše.
Prej sem videla, da si kar 2 knjigi nabavila, te prevedeni. A je skrivnost, komu jih boš poklonila?
Ni skrivnost. Ena gre očetu za rojstni dan. Sem že rekla, da bom napisala eno tako lepo posvetilo, ker pač v moji družini so vsi taki zelo res fajn, sočutni ljudje in obožujemo živali, imamo pse doma in mačka in tako. In že od malega sem bila tudi vzgojena, tako da pač treba živalmi lepo ravnati, ampak vsem tudi moji starši so bili od malega vzgojeni, naučeni, tako da je pač uživanje mesa normalno in koristno. In zdaj v bistvu probam biti jaz nek ta zgled tem vrednotam, ki so me jih sami naučili. In v bistvu...
Sam še bolj dosledna kot oni.
Sam še nekoliko bolj dosledna, ja.
Te druga pa?
Ta druga je pa tako čist za rezervo, se pravi, ko nekje začutim, ko me ljudje sami vprašajo, nikoli ne težim, in potem pač postanejo odkrdovedni in začnejo sami raziskovati pol to veganstvo in tako, ko jih navdušam, in potem čim vidim, da se je nekaj premaknil, da je ena iskarca, potem imam v štartu, zdaj v nizkem štartu to knjigo, da podkrepim to iskarco.
Hvala, Nina.
Hvala.
Oddajo je omogočilo Društvo za osvoboditev živali in njihove pravice. Gradimo živalim, naravi in zemlji prijazno Slovenijo.
Svoj glas dajem za živali in naravo,
Kot članica društva skupaj z mnogimi gradim, živalim in okolju prijaznejšo Slovenijo. Pridruži se tudi ti.